I now call this regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order at 5:30 p.m. Please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Schubert?
Here.
Ms. McCall?
Present.
Ms. Bennett? Mr. Carpenter?
Here.
Excuse me. Ms. Haley?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 6 present, 1 absent, we have a quorum.
We will now take a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we start each board meeting, it bears reminding, the mission of Rockford Public Schools is to collaboratively engage all students in an equitable first-class education for a changing world. Before going any further, I want to thank Kim Pedersen and Aaron Hill, who are working behind the scenes to produce the board's broadcast via YouTube live stream and Comcast Channel 20. I also wish to welcome Superintendent's Advisory Representative Ryan Marr from Guilford High School. The first item on the agenda is public hearing for the issuance of general obligation school bonds. The resolution provides for the issue of not to exceed 9.9 million general obligation school bonds, Series 2025 of the district for the purpose of altering and reconstructing school buildings and purchasing and installing equipment therein for fire prevention and safety, energy conservation, and school security purposes, and providing for the levy of a direct annual tax sufficient to pay the principal and interest on said bonds, and authorizing the sale of said bonds to the purchaser thereof. We have life safety projects from the state mandated 10-year survey that have not been completed and need additional funds to complete the work. Do members have any questions or comments? Members of the public also have the opportunity to provide oral testimony or public comments concerning the proposed issuance of the bonds. We have no speakers regarding the bonds. We will now, I'll now take a motion and a second to adjourn from public hearing portion of the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Yes.
Mr. Schubert?
Yes.
Ms. McCall?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Ms. Haley?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes with 6 yeses, 1 absent.
We are now in our regular portion of the meeting. Are there any changes, correction, or additions to the meeting minutes? If not, they will be accepted as submitted. Thank you. Ms. Stanford will now lead the Stakeholders Committee.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll start our committee meeting as usual with our 12-month agenda. As you can see, we'll be celebrating our PS 205, highlighting our feature post on the 205 vibe, and much more. Now it's time to look at all the good things happening in our district. BPAC, Bilingual Parent Advisory Committee, hosted a gratitude dinner at Risa Middle School. It brought bilingual families together to share delicious dishes and meaningful conversations. The evening focused on discussing bilingual funding and getting feedback to help enhance bilingual programs. With around 100 attendees, the event was a huge success. Thank you to the amazing BPAC cabinet members and RPS 205 bilingual staff for making this gathering so memorable. On Wednesday, December 4th, Rockford Public Schools hosted the Fall Student Teacher Celebration at Prairie Street Brewhouse. Administration from across the district, as well as university and community partners, came together to thank and celebrate our fall student teachers and their cooperating teachers for their service. Some RPS staff were presenters at the Raising Student Achievement Conference in Oak Brook, Illinois last month. McIntosh Principal Aaron Sahlberg and McIntosh Instructional Coach Elizabeth Hand presented Start Strong to Stay Strong, the importance of a morning routine for student success. Ellis Instructional Coach Jessica Berg presented Fluency is Fundamental. Carlson Assistant Principal Kelsey Scarpetta Carlson and Instructional Coach Catherine Trotter presented Enhancing Student Achievement Through Rigorous Problem Solving. Way to represent RPS 205 at such a large conference. Fifth graders from Bloom, Brookview, Johnson, and Welsh were treated to a holiday concert at Guilford High School under the direction of Mrs. Kubaki. The entire concert was performed by the high school musicians, who also showcased how each instrument worked. Mr. Wall's choir students also performed for the elementary students. In December, the Family and Community Engagement Team hosted over 1,000 students at Skateland to celebrate their achievements for the first quarter. These students met the criteria for the BAGS, Behavior, Attendance, Grades, Goal, by maintaining strong attendance, missing no more than 2 days, achieving A's, B's, and 1 C, and having no suspensions. This event recognized their hard work and dedication as part of our ongoing effort to support academic and behavioral success. Students will have another opportunity to qualify for the spring incentive, which begins on January 17th. To celebrate National School Lunch Week in October, RPS 205 and Tyson held a contest to see who could make the most creative chicken sandwiches. The students who created the winning chicken sandwiches won an iPad. Their creations will also be featured on the lunch menu in the spring semester. The winners were announced in November. Liam Muth, 11th grader at Auburn, Avery Hewells, 6th grader at Montessori, Andrew Farrenwald, 5th grader at Gregory. In December, Tyson sales rep Jake Wakefield came to Rockford to present both Liam and Avery with their iPads in their classrooms. Gregory held an assembly for the presentation of the iPad. Congratulations to the contest winners. Last month, the district's administration building got into the holiday spirit and showed off their tacky garments for a contest. And the winners are Ugliest Sweater, Joyce Budlong, Software Support Specialist; Cutest Sweater, Kim Nelson, Executive Director of Early Childhood; Best Homemade Do-It-Yourself Outfit, Valerie Merle Reyes, IT Help Desk Specialist; Best Head to Toe Outfit, Amy Gannon, Executive Director of MTSS. At the NAACP Freedom Dinner on November 17th, Virgil Hobson, liaison for the Family and Community Engagement Department, was honored with the Jewel Lee Powell Unsung Hero Award. This award recognizes Virgil's unwavering dedication and impactful work in supporting our community. Virgil is currently in his 6th year with RPS and has become a trusted advocate and leader, building strong connections with students, families, and community partners. Congratulations. The district's administration building held another 205 Leadership Summit last month. We continued the conversation around the instructional core, our strategy that shifts from management to purposeful leadership. We highlighted the essential roles that central office employees play in supporting principals, teachers, and staff to create an environment where all students thrive. Susan Uram RPS 205's Director of Educational Technology helped Girl Scout Troop number 2098, mostly RPS students, earn their Coding Basics badge. Read about this amazing collaboration on the 205 Vibe. And now in legislative news, we're going to do something a little different tonight. At recent board retreats, we talked about legislative priorities at the local, state, and federal levels. I'm going to present what we discussed as being important to us. There's the IDEA funding, which is a federal topic, transportation funding and driver pay, which is a state topic, ADA funding, which is federal, speech language pathologist licensure, state and federal, teacher shortage, state and federal, housing availability for new students, local and state, childcare, local, state, and federal, barriers to licensure and certification, state, universal mental health screenings, state, and transportation, reimbursement, drivers and aides, which is local. We do not have a feature presentation tonight. At the board meeting on January 21st, Chief DEI Officer Dr. Antoine Reed will talk about the recent student listening sessions that were held that focused on the Team's Bags initiative. And there are students that want to come to that. That's why we're postponing it. They couldn't make it tonight. We finished with the board calendar, reminding board members of the opportunities available to interact with our students, families, and community each month. Make sure you check the calendar on a regular basis for the most up-to-date information. Do any board members have anything to share regarding any school events you've attended or any interactions you've had in the community? Ms. McCall?
Thank you. I want to speak on the last day of school before Christmas break. I was afforded the opportunity to attend the SOAR Academy's holiday celebration. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it was absolutely amazing. We had Santa, we had the Grinch, we had a couple of extra Grinches, and there were activities for, students and families to gather around and just have a fellowship. And the families also brought their extended families, so it was good to see, little sisters and little brothers looking up to big sisters and brothers and their teachers and things at the school. Also, it was called a Christmas celebration. But I just want to shout out SOAR Academy. I was invited to a couple of other ones, but meetings throughout the day prevented me from coming to those. So just keep sending them, and as my schedule allows, I will be happy to attend. And I just really love the interaction between the students and the staff and the parents. It really showed the togetherness from that. And I made 3 beautiful ornaments that I got to put on my tree.
Anyone else?
I have a question, actually, in regards to the DEI presentation. So is that rescheduled?
Yes, January 21st.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, that'll conclude our report.
Thank you, Ms. Stanford. Mr. Carpenter will now lead the Performance Monitoring Committee.
Thank you. Tonight we have 2 reports for the Performance Monitoring Committee. We will begin with a report about integrated math from Dr. Gallagher and Mrs. Detman. The purpose of this report is to clarify what integrated math is and lay out the administration's approach to solving the issue of math achievement in our district. And after that, Dr. Brown will present our final ARP-ESSER report, which will conclude our series of reports on these grant dollars. So first for integrated math, Ms. Detman, I'll turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I want to open by just saying that you'll see throughout tonight's presentation a partnership between Dr. Gallagher and myself and the areas of the district that we represent, because the problem of math achievement in our district is not a simple one. It's pretty complex. And so what we hope to do today is really just sort of clarify what is integrated math, what are we hoping to achieve, why did we start down this path? And what do we know and understand today about some of our implementation challenges? And where are we headed next? So we hope that today's presentation will really be one to build understanding and clarity. And I also want to begin just by thanking you for spending this much time on the board floor talking about math instruction. I think it's critical. I believe it's critical both personally and professionally. I have 3 children in our district who are learning math, and I am helping them along the way. And they are getting ready to be students in integrated math. And you have lots of children in your lives, and you represent children throughout the district who are also undergoing this course of study. It matters a lot, and I'm really grateful that you're asking the questions that you're asking, and that we're taking the time on the board floor to really talk about instruction and curriculum. It's our core business. And so to that point, really, being able to have time and space on the board floor to engage in conversation gives us a valuable opportunity to drive change. And our data says that we need to change something. What that thing is what I'll be walking you through tonight. But first, before we really jump into too much depth, I want to start just by giving you some background. Because many of you took your seat, were elected as board members after all of this work had been board approved. And so the history is not one that you're familiar with. And I want to briefly take you down just sort of a walk down memory lane of how we got to where we are. But we're going to begin with just a definition of integrated math. Ms. McCall, you asked a really good question a couple of meetings ago about the standards, and are we covering all the standards? And President Pearson, you asked a couple of questions about what is the difference between like the traditional pathway and integration? How are they different? Why are we doing it differently? Here's a basic definition. Integrated math in its simplest form is a way of presenting the same topics that we usually teach, the way that we all learned it, algebra, geometry, algebra 2, but in a more natural 3-year sequence that gives kids an opportunity to have exposure to how algebra, geometry, and algebra 2 are related. So they do not learn them in isolation, they learn them as related concepts. It's a spiraled curriculum, which means that I have more than one chance to learn algebra, more than one chance to learn geometry, and algebra 2. And in a traditional curriculum, you have them separated and you have one shot to learn them. 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade year. And so when those are taught in isolation, by the time you take your state test at the end of your junior year, you're recalling things that you learned your freshman year. Okay, so at its very just sort of fundamental, that's what it is. It integrates those 3 concepts, but they're the same standards. How did we get here? Well, we began in 2015. The board gave us a directive that we were to rewrite all grade levels and all content areas of curriculum within 5 years. I've mentioned that a couple of times. Not only that they needed to be rewritten through a new design process, but that it needed to be done collaboratively with members of the teachers union so that we made decisions about our curriculum and instruction. And so the work in high school math began with what we call a curriculum task force, and that started in 2017. That curriculum task force was led by our Dean of Secondary Math, and it was populated by 6 members of the REA. The goal of that task force was the fundamental decision. In examining our student data, do we continue down the traditional path of what's called AGA, or Algebra, Geometry, Algebra 2, or do we move toward an integrated approach, an integrated course sequence? And after their research, including looking at position papers from National Council of Teachers in Mathematics, and this was, after Common Core, the Curriculum Task Force made the recommendation that we move to adopt the integrated model. So that was the first decision that was made. That went to Instructional Council for approval, and that then kicked off a curriculum leadership team. That curriculum leadership team expanded that task force from 6 members to 10. Those 10 members represented all of our traditional high schools and every grade level. So we were approved generally for 6, and we asked Instructional Council to expand it so that we could be fully representative at 10 members. That curriculum leadership team's job was to choose the resource, and that CLT then brought forward a resource to Instructional Council in February of 2018. The function of Instructional Council is to make recommendations to the Board of Education, and so the board then approved that resource in March of 2018 for initial rollout in August of 2018. And we did this slowly. We started just with Integrated Math 1 the freshman year. So the following fall, in the August of 2019, we began with Integrated Math 2, followed by our ransomware attack, followed by COVID, followed by hybrid learning. And so as we were rolling things out, we had all sorts of contextual things happening all around us. And I just want to make sure that we take this story all the way back to where we started, because I think it matters. So what are we talking about when we're talking about integrated math, and what is CPM? Integrated math is our approach. CPM is our core instructional resource, okay? It is rigorous, it is aligned with the standards, and it's designed to provide comprehensive math education with the same standards as algebra, geometry, and algebra 2, but learned in a different sequence. Why does this matter? You might have heard of algebra being referred to as sort of a gatekeeper. When students only have one shot to learn algebra their freshman year, if they are not successful, or if they are barely successful and have barely mastered that content, those deficits follow them into geometry and into algebra 2. And in fact, what we found is we had about a 30% failure rate of algebra when we began this. Then students would recover that, they would take geometry, and then they would take something called math topics. And so they were constantly in recovery mode, trying to learn a new set of standards while still not having mastered the previous set. What integration does is it gives you an opportunity to revisit those core concepts spiraled throughout your 3 years in algebra, geometry, and algebra 2. This means I have more than one chance, and I have multiple opportunities to master that content and get really good at it. So the problem then is we're not implementing it. If all the standards are covered, and if the resource sort of face value has everything that we need, then what's happening with our math achievement? So we wanted to study that. And what we've found so far is that really only 25% of teachers are fully implementing the integrated math curriculum. And so then the next logical question is to ask why? And there is a lot of nuance to that story. And we'll keep going, and I'll keep referring back to that nuance. In identifying the why, we have to make sure that our end goal is not to be right about whether we needed to continue with traditional or integration, but that we are acknowledging the problems that we have right now and making sure that we have studied it so well that we understand the solutions that we need to put our time and energy into to do these things, to strengthen the instructional alignment, most importantly, to support teacher development. If implementation is our strongest issue, then teachers need our support, and to provide an equitable learning experience for students across the district. That's really at the heart of it. So there are 3 different paths that we need to walk down, asking good questions along the way. We need to ask, are we covering all the standards? That was a great question to ask. The second question we need to ask is, okay, if we're covering the standards, do we have the right resource? And then the third question that we need to ask is it the instructional model then? So here's what we know today about those 3 paths. First, sequencing of the standards. This fall, we've conducted a curriculum audit because we need to responsibly know that we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum in every grade level and at every content area. And here's what we learned. Our curriculum audit shows that our curriculum and the resource do in fact include all state standards for high school math. And our audit is conducted with focus groups of teachers who are actively teaching these courses right now. Here's what we learned from them. Yes, all the standards are there. Two groups of teachers had some concerns with what we call viability. In other words, that they have enough time to teach all the content that is required. And part of the complexity for them is that some of our students are coming in with so many gaps in math that they're having a hard time moving at the pace that they need to move in order to cover the content that students need. And so they've asked for support from the central office and how to make decisions about prioritizing some of the most leverageable skills. Secondly, all focus groups acknowledge that the instructional strategies are present and they are aligned to the standards. However, they did also say that some classrooms are lacking consistent access to all the materials that they need to be successful. I noted that we have rolled this out sort of 1 year at a time, and in those first years, everybody got the full kit. And then teachers have left, new teachers have come on, and slowly over time, some of those materials are not only out of sight, they're out of mind. And in our focus groups, we had new teachers with veteran teachers, and we really uncovered that not everyone has access to everything they need. We have easy solutions to that. We have these items in district, they just need to be in the right hands with training. And then finally, stronger guidance and strategies for differentiation, specifically because our students are coming in with gaps in their math knowledge. So here's the score. These are the rubrics from the curriculum audit. Across the top, you can see integrated math 1, 2, and 3, and then along the side, you can see the 4 buckets. You can see that in the guaranteed piece, in terms of are we covering all the standards, it's a 4-point scale. Yes, we are. The viability, I shared with you already, the teacher concerns there. I believe those are things that we can mitigate together in partnership. The practices for instruction, by and large, are present within the resource. However, in that resources for instruction, we have a little bit of work to do, and that is more of a communication issue. So the second question we need to ask is, okay, if all of the standards are there, is this the right resource? When we adopted this, our teachers use a rubric-based decision-making process, and basically it's a competition among any available resources. Our teacher team at that point in time took a look at 3 different textbooks and then rated them on a number of criteria. That's a snapshot of the actual rubric right there. And CPM in aggregate scored the highest of all 3. CPM also meets expectations on ed reports in both alignment and usability. So that takes us down to instructional practice, that third problem that we need to explore. And in this case, I really wanted to highlight our student feedback. You're going to hear the full report from Dr. Reed on January 21st, but here's a snapshot of what our students have said about math. Students consistently, and I added the word consistently because this echoes feedback that we heard last year as well, have expressed a desire for relevant, hands-on, and activity-based learning with clear instruction, and CPM is designed to deliver that. They want personalized interaction. They don't want lecture-based instruction. They want group collaboration and one-on-one support. They want their math to matter in some way to their lives, and I think that can resonate with all of us. They also want their instruction to be activity-based. They want to be on whiteboards. They want to be included in interactive tasks, and they want group-oriented work. And then equity and support. And I thought this was really an interesting sort of serve and response between our teachers and students. Our teachers in our focus group said that they were really struggling with strategies for differentiation. And our students are saying that they're really struggling to be seen and understood and given what they need in the moment in the classroom. And I think that's a real opportunity for us to listen to both teachers and students and provide more support. So when all of these things are lined up, when we have the standards that create the curriculum, when we have a high-quality instructional resource, and when students are experiencing the kind of instructional practice that they need, that should be a recipe for success. Our problem is that it's only happening roughly 25% of the time. And so that is a system-wide problem in implementation and an instructional delivery system. How do we get a high-quality experience from an idea or a plan on a page into the experience of every student? What we've heard from we have a teacher support team and our academic return on investment study, and they're our guidance. They let us know what is real in classrooms and implementing. And what we've heard from them, even the most skeptical, is once they sort of take a risk, jump in, allow that collaborative learning, allow students to take charge of their learning, have less lecture and more application, students are more engaged, students take more ownership, and they're demonstrating more mastery of the material. A good question for you as a board to ask, which you have asked, is then show us how that's made a difference in the data from those who are implementing and those that have not. And what's really hard to do is with a level of 25% implementation, I can't guarantee that students have had that same experience 3 years in a row to get it both integrated math 1 into integrated math 2 into integrated math 3. It might be they didn't have that experience in 1, but they did for 2, and then they didn't for 3. And so that makes that sort of data pull really difficult. And so our goal here is to really solve this problem of instructional practice and implementation so that we can more responsibly take a look at student achievement. And so I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Gallagher now, because any decision like this, a deployment of this size and magnitude, takes partnership. It isn't just about making the decision, doing the research, and creating the plan. It's also about understanding the reality in our schools and what teachers are going through, especially in all of those interruptions that I named during this timeline, to make sure we're providing them the support that they need and the clarity that they need in order to make this happen for our kids.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Eddie. So the why, if you think about the need for consistency as a matter of equity, you look at our high mobility rate, you look at our low achievement in terms of math proficiency. We don't need every teacher in every high school to literally be on the same page in their resource every day, but we need them to roughly be in the same place so that our students in every classroom across every high school are getting that same curricular experience. I really think it's important to emphasize, Heidi gave the context that the rollout of CPM started in integrated math right before we had the pandemic. If you look beyond CPM, the instructional resource, following an integrated math pattern where it's not algebra, geometry, algebra, but it's spiraling that content, it's also highly reliant on instructional strategies that emphasize collaboration and group work amongst students. So when teachers got the toolkits and the training right before the pandemic, and then we all went virtual, and they're expected to have fidelity to a curriculum that requires group work in Zoom or chats, it's virtually impossible for the teachers to meet that criterion under those conditions. So when we came back from the pandemic, it's a high priority that we do have fidelity implementation of this new curriculum. We started the system-wide framework in school year 22. That was the first year that we were back fully in person. And at the high school level, we had identified 8 standards of practice as the accountability measures where we wanted to see improvement in performance in the high schools. Of those 8 measures, integrated math was one of them, and there are 2 total instructional measures of those 8 standards of practice. At the conclusion of last year, once we got through the first 3 years of the system-wide framework, those 2 instructional standards of practice had the lowest overall average score with the high schools. And in my mind, what that demonstrates is that while we had identified these are one of the 8 key priorities that we need to address integrated math, that principals, school improvement teams, teachers were identifying other standards that were more leverageable, more high priority coming out of the pandemic. So that if you look at MTSS as another standard of practice, we saw significant growth across all of the high schools there. They saw a need to emphasize interventions and supports for students coming out of the pandemic. Likewise, if you look at the standards of practice for sense of belonging for students, For engagement of families and engagement of staff, we saw significant growth in those areas. Similar to the growth that we saw in the System-Wide Framework 1.0 for MTSS, along with that, we saw a dramatic increase in having model academies reach accreditation status with the NCAC, building that sense of community and belonging. But yes, those two instructional standards of practice were the lowest scores after the last 3 years. When you look at the new 2.0 of the system-wide framework for this next 3 years, we're now ready to move beyond the systems and structures to provide a sense of belonging and a sense of support and intervention to the students, to ensuring that we have high quality curriculum and instruction in the classroom. And so that you can see on this graphic, it's too small for me to be able to read it for you, but as principals and school improvement leaders are going into classrooms, as the standards of practice team is going into classrooms, there are very explicit teacher look-fors. There's 4 of them. Are you using the right material? Are you in the right space with it? Are you communicating standards, et cetera? And then there's those student look-fors. Are the students engaging each other in questioning? Are the students justifying their use of evidence to clearly communicate conclusions that they're making based off of that evidence? And so as we move forward, our journey forward, it's really about being all in on this new 2.0 system-wide framework. We saw success with the systems and supports and the stakeholder engagement. Now it's about being in classrooms and making sure students are getting that rigorous instruction. So you all had rightly asked the last time that we had presented, how is integrated math look in other districts? Our AOI core team has started that work where we have identified similar districts that all utilize integrated math. Many of them use CPM as the instructional resource, not all of them. And so now the work is to coordinate with them, to get with them and understand what their experience has been, analyze their fidelity of curriculum implementation, analyze their student achievement results, and bring back some takeaways to all of you. With regards to solutions and next steps, first, we need to increase consistency in the curriculum implementation. We need to continue to provide instructional training and professional development. And you can see that we have on the 28th and the 29th will be our next set of dates that we'll have training with CPM. We need to enhance supports that are provided to teachers through their PLCs. Keeping in mind, every Thursday is a late start at the high schools, and that provides frequent opportunities for the math PLCs to get together. Are they being provided proper supports? We were able to partnership with the ROE with a grant that is worth $48,000 with regards to how it benefits our math PLCs. And we're going to be rolling out this ROE partnership beginning second semester at Jefferson and Lincoln with hopefully some takeaways that we can scale out to our other secondary schools. But we're going to be able to have REA coaches that are going to be dedicated to those schools every week for the next 20 weeks, attending their weekly PLCs and also getting into classrooms to observe the implementation of the curriculum.
Let me just jump in really quick. PLC stands for Professional Learning Community. All that means is that Integrated Literacy 1, Integrated Literacy 2, Integrated Literacy 3 teams of teachers are getting together. ROE stands for Regional Office of Education. So and I just noticed we didn't have we just had the abbreviations and didn't have the definition. So nothing mystical. It's just on those Thursdays, teachers get together with the people who teach the same classes.
As another next step, of course, we'll continue to conduct this AROI study. Just as you've identified the value and the need, we see it as a high priority, and so we'll continue our AROI study. To that, with reports and updates. Oops. Our next check-in will be our mid-year checkpoint. That'll be March 4th. Our final summative scores for the instructional standard of practice from the System-Wide Framework 2.0 will be available at the very beginning of June. Shortly thereafter, we'll be able to provide the end-of-year report for where we landed and provide a comprehensive update, and that will be followed in August by final recommendations. At this point, we'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Does anyone have any questions? Ms. Haley?
So I think when this was first presented to us, we were told that integrated math had been in implementation for about 10 years. I think that's what we were told. And I think that's where I say that now, but I think that's where the upward was from. Why were we continuing to go down this road? And with so much time that had elapsed, and there was no improvement in our math. As all of us probably are aware with the, and we've known for a long time that systems in the workplace are going to be more automated, which is going to require improvement in our math and for our students to be competitive in the workforce. So it's dire, very dire, that we get our students on the right path and track with math, because the jobs of the future are going to require that. So I think, the concern was that it had been so long, but now we see it's been about 6-7 years. And with COVID, there was that kind of put a wrench in everything. And so it seems that we are kind of starting anew from 2022 with following the path of integrated math. So I can understand why we don't see the results, but it's still frustrating that we don't see the results. I think it's very important that we have the buy-in of our teachers and our instructional staff. I am curious to know when integrated math was adopted, the Dean of Math and the 6 members who made the adoption, are they still with RPS 205?
Several of them are. I think just from memory, 4 out of 6, I think 2 have retired. But there are several folks who were either on the task force or the CLT or both who are current practicing teachers as well.
Okay. So I do want to reiterate that it's very important that we get on the right track with this. I understand that with 25% implementation and the fact that a student may have implementation in Algebra 1 and then get into geometry, it's not implemented, and then the next year it's implemented. There's not a continuity there for a student to be successful. So I really look forward to the research from the other districts who do the integrated math, as well as the final study that we have in the report in August. I really look forward to that. And and collaboration with and teachers who are involved, because I have heard that even teachers who have students in the district who are graduating this year, they're concerned that their student is going to college and they're putting them in remedial courses as opposed to starting their student in college level math. So.
Thank you.
Ms. McCall.
Thank you. So the thing that I cannot get past is that there are still 75% of teachers who, by whatever means, refuse to get on board with the integrative math, right? So you're saying that you're moving to part 2, the next level for the 25%, but we still have 75% of teachers who aren't getting it. It seems to me like what you're doing is trying to, with all the implementations and the PLC meetings and things, like you're trying to gather buy-in for something that's already been approved and decided to be the math of the district, right? So I'm still confused or trying to figure out how is this possible? 75% of the teachers not wanting to or implementing anything related to what has been outlined.
Yeah, I think I would want to get back to you with regards to what the calculation is for what that 25%, 75% represents. I don't think that it means that it's a refusal to implement the curriculum. I think it's more so that not all the look-fors from whichever checklist potentially we're all seeing in any particular classroom visit, but I would like to get back to you with what that calculation actually represents in order to accurately respond.
Okay, because
Ms. McCall, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, yeah, because, the way it's being explained now, as a person, just listening to it, it sounds like 75% are refusing. So if I misspoke, to strike it from the record or whatever, but I'm just trying to see whatever it is, what is the reasoning why we have such a high number not participating in what was chosen?
So I think there are a few things. And number one, we do have a shortage of math teachers. We also have turned over a lot of math teaching positions. So some of the folks who were here when we started this are no longer here. Some have entered midstream. Some have been fully trained. Some have not been fully trained. Some of them, a lot of our math teachers are teaching in overage. So they're teaching 6 classes, and they may be some of the same teachers who didn't get the full dosage of training and coaching that have been offered. So I want to be really careful with sort of like words like refusal or rejection or those kinds of things. At the end of the day, though, we don't have an equitable learning environment in our math classrooms where we can guarantee that all of our kids are getting high quality math instruction in alignment to this core curriculum.
Okay.
So what we tried to do this year is really level set. And so we offered training in the summer that was moderately attended. We repeated that training on contract time this school year, and in partnership with Morgan and our principals, ensured that we had the vast majority of teachers who hadn't had the full dose of training here being trained. They'll have that final dose in January.
Okay. So even with that explanation, it's a little better, you're saying that that it's not just one-sided, right?
Right.
I want to be able to, call the people to task that are needed to be called to task. Yeah. So as a head of a department or whatever, if you notice that 75% aren't at this participating, and then you just said, we didn't have some people, we got new people coming in, we got people leaving. So the due diligence is on the department heads to make sure that these teachers are being equipped with what they needed to, so they can say, I think it's a good idea. Let's do this integrated math. It just seems like, to me, everybody's passing the puck when it really is more than the problem. The situation is bigger than teachers not being able to implement it.
I can just share. I think we had a very similar issue that we can look to as a potential success story. That there's no guarantee of success here. I think we have to be really sober in our assessment of the fact that we are not where we need to be with implementation right now. But to point to a positive story that was with a totally different subject, but it was with literacy instruction, our core literacy resource, Reading Horizons, had a very, very similar implementation level prior to 2022. And our reading scores showed it. And our faculty and staff at the building level and at the district level have really come together and have really embraced the science of reading. And we've seen some really awesome work by our teachers, and we've seen a nearly 6-point increase. We're significantly above where we were pre-pandemic levels with literacy. And that is an example of something we weren't implementing. And it was a combination of people missing trainings or maybe not being sure it was the right resource at that time. Reading Horizons was not popular when it was first rolled out. And we got there. Now that isn't where we are yet with integrated math. I don't want to conflate the two, but that similar journey is what we have to be on to determine, because it would have been very easy for us to pivot away from Reading Horizons as well early on, and we stuck with it. Now, what we're going to have to do this year is we're going to have to see, do we get implementation at a high enough level where we can truly evaluate this instructional resource? And that has continued to be the challenge for all the reasons that Ms. Detman and Dr. Gallagher rolled out there. The other thing I do want to add for the board's context, in the state of Illinois, our state superintendent has made math instruction the #1 priority in the state of Illinois, because our state math scores have gone down a total of 4 points, 3rd through 8th grade, from 2019 to 2024, have not recovered from the, while literacy has recovered to pre-pandemic levels, math has not. And high school math, which is what we're talking about tonight, is down 8 points in the state of Illinois. It went from an average of 34% of students meeting that very high 70th percentile standard down to 26%. We've dropped 7%. We've actually dropped slightly less than the state, but we were also lower than the state average. Bottom line is, there's a reason why Tony Sanders is making this a priority statewide, because we are not the only district in the state that is struggling, and frankly, it's a national issue as well. The pandemic seems to have negatively impacted math literacy more than, numeracy has been more impacted than literacy in terms of being able to recover and help students back.
And
so those are just a couple important things to add to the context of this work. We are not alone in our struggles here as a district, and I want the board to know that.
And I just want to draw one more parallel between Reading Horizons and integrated math. Both of them, they're not just getting a new textbook. That is easy. That's easy change, is getting a new textbook. It is fundamentally changing the way that you instruct. And in both cases, the hesitation is really about change theory. Change is hard, and it's hard to get groups of people to change together. And I think what we're learning right now in listening to the teacher experience is they can't do it alone. They need strong professional learning communities that have to be led by strong instructional leaders in their school and have some sort of coaching aspect. They want to be held accountable to each other so that they're all leaning in and doing that hard work together. And right now, it's sort of an individual effort, and that can't be the way that it is. But that's what we've heard by and large. And so this effort to support professional learning communities, the effort to support principals through observation, having them calibrate with us, what does good math instruction look like? Let's make sure we're all on the same page, is recognizing that it can't be up to each individual teacher. It has to be because the system has clarified the expectation and provided the support for that change to happen. And frankly, I don't think we've done a good enough job managing the level of change that is required to move us from traditional instruction into integration.
Okay, I'm glad that you said that last part, because at the end of the day, when the state superintendent and the rest of the state makes this a top priority, then we should have that same sense of urgency as a district to make sure that we're getting it. And 10 years later, no matter what, pandemic, everything that happened, that happens to everyone, it's still been 3 years post-pandemic that we're getting these same results. So I'm just curious to see, you've already reached out to other districts and things, and they're giving you numbers, but I want to know what percentage of their teachers did this. There's never going to be a district that can mirror RPS 205, right? So just saying that they, finding something that's similar and like, okay, everybody has a problem. Okay, we don't need to have a group of people that's bad. Bad is still bad. If we're not passing, we don't need to be in the group of the not passing people thing. So I'm just curious as to see what the other districts said as far as their percentages of implementation of this. And I just want to know, it just doesn't seem like there's a sense of urgency as far as getting everybody on board that needs to be on board, whether it's, teachers and trainings or, whatever it is that needs to be done, I think it needs to be, put a little sense of urgency behind it because as Ms. Haley said, we have students that are graduating that don't know how to do math, right? And we can't have that. And I don't want to have another cycle. There's another 10 years, 12 years or whatever of mediocre results and a bunch of excuses, really what it is, of why things aren't happening. And that's it.
So I would just like to add a little bit additional context that I think addresses some of what you said. At our high schools, there's a base package of 6 total administrators. We have 1 principal and 5 assistant principals. Prior to last year, I will say last year was the first year that we started providing monthly professional development to our high school assistant principals to build their instructional capacity. A shift that is brand new this year is that when you look at that base package of 5 assistant principals, we've divided up the division of labor now so that 2 of them are focused on culture and climate. So chronic absenteeism, discipline, sense of belonging, all the SEL stuff. And that leaves 3 APs and the principal to be focused solely on being leaders of curriculum and instruction. And we're able to provide differentiated training to them this year. As Heidi mentioned, in December, we had all of our assistant principals that are curriculum and instruction APs, as well as all of our principals go to Jefferson so that they were all getting into math classrooms and debriefing after their visits in the math classrooms. Do we all agree on the things that we're supposed to see? Are we calibrated in our expectations moving forward?
And thank you for explaining that. I'm not saying that, you guys aren't doing your due diligence or whatever. Right. I'm just speaking in general what the optics are. And the optics are what the truth is because we only have 25% buy-in.
I'm Gus Carter. I'm the building principal at Guilford if we have not physically met or in person. And being the practitioner that sees this through on a day-to-day basis, I just wanted to offer some perspective from the field. I was able to participate in some of this conversation prior and listen to the questions that have been asked. And from where I stand, integrated math and CPM are different. The implementation of integrated math has taken place in the sense that kids don't take algebra, geometry, algebra 2. Teachers aren't teaching just geometry for an entire year. Integrated math has taken place. We're shifting to the standards or to the actual instructional strategies that CPM as the resource brings in. That has been where the challenge really lies. I'm not a traditionally trained math teacher, but imagine if we were, you could teach integrated math in a traditionally trained math classroom. So if we all think about our experience as a student, what we had, we would all agree probably today was not necessarily the best approach to teaching possible. The teacher shows you examples, we work on them together, you go then work on them on your own. In large part, that led to homework where you would go home and you would do it yourself, which if you were a struggling math student, all that ever did was reinforce bad habits, which we know now that's a really bad model. That's the traditional way that I guarantee what I just said is probably what we all faced in school. We're trying to shift not from integrated math, not from just not teaching algebra to teaching geometry to algebra 2. We're trying to shift how that instruction is taking place. The shift of the curriculum is taking place. It's the strategies that have been taught in the classroom. And so I think a really interesting point that you brought up about the 25% and the 75%, what we're really asking is, of that 75%, how many are not at full 100% implementation of the strategies? Integrated math takes place, the strategies are shifting. We haven't seen 100% of those strategies be implemented in every single one of those classrooms. That's the expectation, and that's like the ultimate goal. So I think to sort of try to address that question in as much of a practitioner in the field way I can, it's teachers attempting to utilize these strategies that are vastly different than what they probably learned as a teacher, what even I did in my own teacher training, compared with what is required of what you mentioned, what's required of our students to be able to learn to be successful in the future we have to do a better job as a building principal. I have to do a better job of not only holding my teachers accountable, but also providing them with the training that they need in order to be successful in this new model. So again, just wanted to make sure there's the difference between the implementation of integrated math as a curriculum and CPM as the resource in the instructional shift, which is ultimately where the bang for the buck is. That's where we should be seeing the results that we want. And the 75% is not, I would say, a refusal, just from my experience of working with my teachers. It's not an outright refusal of a no, because that would be insubordination, rather a struggle of implementing with full fidelity at all times this whole new approach of instruction that could be different.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Carter, for that explanation. But, when you go to slide 5 of this presentation where it says the rigorous curriculum, you got it highlighted. The CPM is the core instructional resource. So that means you have to find a way to emphasize this or to plug whatever holes you need, because if the core instructional resource is not being accepted, then nothing is gonna work. You have it highlighted. It's our core instructional resource. So how can we expect any progress when we still have 75% that's not 100% proficient in this? So that's the point that I'm just trying to articulate. And thank you guys for everything that you do, but that just doesn't sit easy with me, knowingly that we're operating with 75% of the teachers not being able to implement the core instructional resource.
Yeah, and I think from a principal perspective, I would agree with you that number does not sit well with me either. And that Dr. Gallagher is correct. When we came back from COVID, the priority was really looking at the way that we intervened on students' behalf, both from an academic standpoint and a social emotional standpoint, and recognizing that we need to do more, that we have to do more. And MTSS, I know in large part was a priority at Guilford and also in my colleague schools as well. 75% implementation means that we're not focused on the 25%. When you see the PLCs, when you see those next steps, that's not on the 25%. That's focused on supporting the 75%, get more comfortable in the classroom. Again, in large part, some of this reflects on student experience and on family experience. We have had those conversations where parents and students expect the traditional instruction, and when that isn't happening, they feel like my student isn't learning anything, because again, it's a different approach. And so there's a lot of learning that has to take place. There's a lot of training that has to take place, not just on the teacher part, but on our families, our community, and understanding what it is that we're doing. Because you could walk into a classroom and look at a CPM strategy, and it could be that students are all doing this and the teacher is just standing back. And if I don't know what's going on, right, as a parent, if that's what my child comes home and tells me is happening, I'm going to think, well, this teacher is not teaching, which I can tell you is a conversation I've had multiple times with some families. And that isn't the case. You have to be able to understand that. And so if we're having a hard time with that, we have to be able to support our staff as well. So we are focused on the 75% with these classroom visits, with these walkthroughs, with the rubric that we're using to verify, like, what are we looking for? What are we seeing? And then what are the next steps? Because again, if we're all implementing CPM, we could all be implementing different parts of it, things that we're comfortable with or not. I may be struggling in an area that you are not struggling in. And so we really have to get more individualistic here, but also providing that support, again, for that 75% that you said, because it doesn't sit well with, from me or from any of my colleagues, is not okay.
President Pearson.
Thank you, and thank you for each that have spoken to this matter. The first thing, before I forget, I need an updated slide of this presentation because I'm hearing page 5, but mine it says 4, and you had 10 or 12, and so if I can get an updated presentation, that would be helpful. So I look forward to the day that RPS 205 is the leading district academically. we frequently hear how this is a global issue or statewide, and our primary focus is our PS 205. And we have a responsibility to our community to graduate students that would be productive in our community. So I do have a question. I heard that the 75 or the 25% implementation have already been discussed. But I am interested in knowing what the implementation percentage was at rollout 1 and at rollout 2.
We didn't measure in the same way in 2018 and 2019 that we did in System-Wide Framework 1.0 that started in 22. So I can't give you an apples-to-apples comparison. At that point in time, we had department chairs and not curriculum implementation leaders. So there was a lot of things are different now than they were in 2018.
Okay, so my question is, what was the percentage of implementation?
We didn't measure it.
Okay, very good.
We had
so
some
you didn't
coaching.
measure it. Okay, that's it.
We had classroom observations and coaching, but we did not keep like spreadsheets of data.
Okay, very good. That would have been good enough that you didn't measure it. So here we are, and I'm going to tell you my observation, because there is no way. Now we've spent about almost an hour of the reason why and what we could do. I also heard gaps. So we identified that there were gaps in math. What did we do to address the gaps?
I think part of that would be why principals and school improvement teams wanted to focus at that when we first came back from the pandemic on MTSS. So they wanted to make sure that they had systems of support for tier 2 interventions, for tier 3 interventions, which basically mean tier 2 is smaller group intervention or it's additional supports pushing into classrooms. Tier 3 is more very small group, almost individualized supports. We knew coming out of the pandemic what the need would be academically and social emotionally. And so our principals worked tirelessly to build systems so that we have the right staff in place, with the right schedules in place, with the right criteria for how to identify and support students to get that all in place. That was the priority with the System-Wide Framework 1.0 starting in 22. Now that that base has been established, or we have that foundation, that is why when you look at the System-Wide Framework 2.0 and you look at those standards of practice, they're much more rigorous with regards to the expectations of what's taking place in the classroom, implementing the curriculum, using the appropriate instructional strategies.
Okay, so with those systems in place, we still have 25% implementation. I'm trying to understand what we're doing. Is it working? If it is not working, then what are we going to do? Because we are spinning wheels, and we compared, we shift to Reading Horizon. However, there were many adjustments to even Reading Horizon. So it is very frustrating to listen to us go around and around with this integrated math. I asked a simple question some time ago. How does one fail integrated math, go to summer school, attend class twice, and is declared proficient? How does that happen?
I don't know if I have an appropriate way that I could ask that question, but with regards to your frustration, I would just say it's shared, and we identified this topic precisely because of our frustration with it, and that's why we're going to be sharing future reports again in March, and then with the final reports in June, and recommendations for what your main question, what are we going to do? That'll be that final report with our recommendations in August.
I can also say one of the other things we're going to do as far as the viability, the part of like, is there enough time to teach all the things we need to teach? That came out pretty clearly in those curriculum audits. And so we're going to be meeting with the teachers of integrated math to find out what specific things that the teachers of integrated math 1 really need to focus more on that are key points in integrated math 2 and integrated math 3. And where are some places where we can save some time? Because that was one of the biggest issues that came out from the audits, was just enough time to teach all the things that they have to teach. And so we're going to be meeting with the CILs and then also other math teachers to say, what are the, I mean, all the standards are important, but like which ones we need to focus on because they're leverageable for the future courses that'll help set the students up for success later on.
My next point is the integrated math curriculum, specifically college preparatory math, is rigorous, aligned with state standards, and designed to provide comprehensive math education spanning the same learning standards as algebra, geometry, and algebra 2. So another point, not every student is interested in preparing for college because they're not planning to go to college. So have we considered a general math for students and college preparatory? Because it seems like we are presenting a math to students that is not a fit, and we continue at it, and it is not making sense to me.
Yeah, so there's 54 standards in the Common Core standards for the high school mathematics. Of those, 9 are specifically geared towards being prepared for college and college mathematics. Those are spread throughout the 3 different years, but the 54 standards, that's the meat of what the course is. Whether that was an integrated pathway or an AGA pathway, the number of standards that's tied into there, the vast majority of them aren't intended to be for college prep or for being successful in like college chemistry or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So out of the standards, 54 of them are not geared that way. But that's the piece that we need to work with the teachers to say that's a bunch of standards to cover in 3 years. And the viability piece is a thing saying we just haven't had enough time to hit all of those. So which ones are the ones that are the hardest to teach or the most leverageable? How do we focus on that? That's our next step with the teachers, is figuring out that piece. So it isn't that we're trying to have them do a bunch of extra standards just because we want everyone to go to college, because that's not inherently the issue. The issue is just that there's a lot of standards that the state requires. And again, it's 54 standards total. Of those, only 9 are geared towards college and like future career sort of things.
Okay, very well. Yeah. So this is another observation for the district to consider, because I perceive that there is a disconnect between central administration and schools, school principals, and a disconnect between principals and teachers. And so I would really love to hear from the percentage of teachers that are not at 100% proficient in teaching, or gathering all of it, making it a whole, and where the hiccup really is. Because administrators can stand here all day and explain to us, but the ones that are to deliver to our students are our teachers. So I'm really interested in hearing from the teachers. And then Mrs. Detman, you made a valid point, and it goes back to how we're developing and training our teachers. So you indicated that, teachers left, new teachers started. So we already understand that there is a challenge with teachers in and of itself. And then so are we adequately teaching and training our teachers to deliver? Because if there is a change in teachers in the classrooms, then this isn't, and if things get lost in the shuffle, we're still gonna, 5 years later, spinning wheels on integrated math.
So we've got 7 seconds. I can say that in the past, the training had been voluntary, and that's why Gus had mentioned this year we had teachers go to training during the contract time, so that way we can ensure that they were receiving the training that they need to make this be successful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Haley?
Yeah, I know we're out of time. I know that as a part of our push toward CTE, that the math course at Rock Valley College, the Math 96 is going to be offered. And because we're out of time, I guess I don't need an answer now, but how?
You can use some governance time.
Okay. How with the Rock Valley Foundational Math 96, how does that play into the discussion of integrated math? If students are going to be taking that Math 96, are they also?
They take it their senior year.
Okay.
So we have integrated math 1, 2, and 3, and then we encourage students to take transitional math that need that remediation so that they get the remediation with us so that they're ready to start with credit-bearing courses as they begin their freshman year at a community college.
If I can. Sorry, honey.
No.
I'd also say, so my math journey, I took a break between, I finished all my math standards in 9th grade, and then I didn't take any math at all because I didn't have to, so I didn't want to. And so when I went to go take college math, I couldn't remember how to do the vast majority of things that I had to. So I had to take remedial math classes at college. So I was one of those people, despite the fact that my math, like I passed out of all the other things and I got my stuff done super early. The foundations course it is also meant to help bridge that gap just to keep people in the math world and doing math so that way they don't have that same experience that I did, where they have to pay for a bunch of classes that don't give you any credit. So that isn't just you don't have enough skills, but it's also let's keep things going, right? Let's keep that boulder moving down the hill so you can be successful at the classes that you take.
Okay, so if a student goes 3 years and they're successful in integrated math and they decide to take that transitional math, or they don't decide to take it, if they just do the 3 years, they should be prepared for college level math.
Yes.
If they do enter a community college, even if they're just doing
If they've mastered all those standards, yes, that's the intent. And of course, we encourage students to take a 4th year of math if they're continuing on in post-secondary academics, in higher level math beyond integrated math 3, again, to keep that math brain learning and working as they think about what they want to do next. So there's a series of higher level math electives that students can take, or they can take that transitional math. So despite their next step,
Okay.
they're ready and they have options.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. First of all, I want to say I appreciate the history about how we got here, and also I appreciate the plans for the updates in the future. That obviously this is a topic that we all care a lot about, and we want to see what the plans will be. I had a question about the audit scores. I think it was like page 10 on the slide. I just wanted to know who scored those, how you came up with the scores.
Great question. This is a process that we are creating sort of a new baseline this year. Every grade level, every content area, inclusive of bilingual and special education, is going through this process. In brief, we gather a group of teachers, no more than 12, to sit in a room together, and there's a rubric that has criteria for scores 1 through 4 in each of these areas. And our goal is that we do sort of a brief introduction. Each individual teacher then scores their resources and their curriculum against the rubric individually, and then we share out, and the goal is to develop consensus around that score. Now, before teachers come into the room, our directors have separately conducted a curriculum audit, and our goal, of course, is that we are calibrated across the board because it's an evidence-based rubric. So any places where we may have scored something higher or lower than our teachers are a place where we need to gather people again and have a conversation. By and large, we've been very close to being calibrated.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe this is part of the resources. I guess I'm trying to figure out how it was that so many teachers said that they didn't have the materials. You said that And I guess not how that happened, but how did we know that was a problem, or how did we
No,
not
actually,
know that?
we didn't know that was a problem. So we have a process, we call it the text request form. It's a Google form. Any school can request any material, and then that form coordinates our curriculum department and our distribution center. And first we say, do we have it in stock? And if we don't have it in stock, then we order it, and we make sure that it's delivered to the school in a timely manner. But some of our teachers who were newer and maybe started in the middle of the year or didn't have access to a veteran teacher in their school for some reason actually were not fully knowledgeable of all the things that they should have. So CPM comes with digital access, the teacher edition, some print textbooks, but it also comes with manipulatives like algebra tiles and things like that to really support group work. And so when our teachers got in groups together and we're talking through resources, that's when, wait a minute, you have that? I didn't know that I was supposed to have that. And so that's an easy fix by documenting and formalizing what each teacher kit should be. Our teachers, our curriculum implementation leaders have committed to doing that, and then making sure that's clearly communicated not just to school leadership, but to individual teachers themselves, and they know that they can request those materials.
Okay, good, thank you. And then I thought that when we had talked about this topic earlier, that attendance, absenteeism was a big barrier to implementation, and I don't know if that was brought up today, so I just wanted to see if that was still an issue.
It is still true. Just like any of our curricula, I mean, attendance matters. If you're not there, you can't learn. What CPM does offer, though, is because it spirals content of the most important skills, if you miss it once, you don't miss it forever. And there's sort of a spiraled review built into every lesson. And those teachers who are sort of most mature in their implementation are able to do that with a lot of skill, and those that are kind of drowning in the change are missing some of those pieces. But in the material itself, it does actually offer some mitigation for students who miss some school. Of course, the best answer is that students attend school as often as possible.
All right, thank you. And I think those are all the questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll turn to Dr. Brown.
Okay, this is our last report on all of the COVID spending. So most of these slides you've seen previously. These are really just numbers that have been updated for our actual spend. So we can get through this fairly quickly here. So again, you know, the goal was to extend time, work on growing some of our community partnerships. Big spend was on improving facilities, and then working on renewing, supporting, and developing staff. Again, this is our last report. We have been doing this semi-annually since 2020, and this will be really the wrap-up of the spending for all the different categories. So just a quick reminder, we got $234 million. The first tranche of the money was for the CARES Act, and that was really all just pandemic response. Second was ESSER 2, which you can see there was about $67 million. And then the last pocket of money was ARP ESSER, the $157,359. You can see here for ARP ESSER, since those other two have already closed out and we've spent those, you can see the spending categories here where we spent, you know, on instruction, attendance, social work guidance, health services, et cetera. The big chunk of the money was spent on facility improvements to get air quality improvements in all the buildings, and that was really the big spend out of the $157 million. You know, approximately, you know, 2/3 was spent on facility improvements. This just kind of rounds it out. You see a couple of one-time things that really weren't part of the original ARP ESSER that came out later. The McKinney-Vento came out in fall of 2021. There was a special separate IDEA one and then a McVie grant that came out as well. We tagged those on there. Those weren't really specific to like the big overall grants. Those you can see we didn't quite spend all the money down on those. Those were for some very specific things. And if you couldn't spend the money on it, you couldn't reallocate it to other things. So those were the only ones we didn't get fully spent. A good chunk of the money, we had to spend a minimum of $36 million on learning loss strategy. We ended up spending more than that on the learning loss. You can see here in that second column that, you know, with the SEA set aside, which is the state educational agency. So in addition to the federal set aside requirements, the state had some very specific ways that we had to spend the money as well on that required $36 million. We hit all the targets on that. We actually spent more on learning loss than was required into the grant, and frankly, we needed to spend that additional money. You'll see on these upcoming slides that the types of things that we spent for learning loss, you know, some of the outside vendors that we contracted with for supplemental resources, the Rosecrans partnership, which we continue still today. Some of the buildings have picked up Star and Panorama. Some have picked up PaperCo and are continuing those today with local dollars. You can see some of the Live, Learn, Play partners that we worked with over the years. And you'll see, when we get to the end here on those, we spent about $3.5 million with our local partners, actually coming in and working with the schools to help our students with, some of the learning loss. The air quality strategy was a big spend. You'll see that we completed all of the upgrades we had intended to do. We actually did it for $2 million less than what we were originally budgeting. And so those dollars actually got reallocated to the learning loss. And so we were able to spend every penny of the money that was allocated outside of those specialized like IDEA grants, but all of the CARES Act, all of ESSER 2, and all of the pure ARP ESSER money, we were able to spend 100% of it in the categories that we were required to spend it in. So we did not give one penny back to Washington, D.C. So that's the good news. So you can see here on kind of some of the final budget, where we ended up on the budget spend, and then where we ended up. This is again on the construction. You can see on that previous slide in the middle, we were anticipated to be about $105 million out of ARP ESSER. We ended up spending about $103, and those dollars went back to the learning loss. Again, we were able to complete all the projects. Mike's team did a great job, really closing out and wrapping up all these projects. We got down to the wire on a couple of them, but we got them done, and we filed the final expenditure report with the state in December. And so we have closed these out. So, questions?
Does anyone have any questions?
All right.
Ms. Haley?
So I was just looking at this ARP ESSER funding, well, the pages, maybe 6, the IDA funding.
Yeah.
So we weren't able to spend $244,000.
Some of that is very specific on what it could and could not be spent for. And so some of these didn't come out until very late either. And we weren't able to spend all the dollars in a couple of those categories. The McKinney-Vento, we weren't able to spend all of it either. Again, there were very specific categories they had to be spent in. And with the time that was allotted, because some of those actually closed earlier than the other ones, we just weren't able, because of the late nature that those came out and the very specific requirements, we weren't able to end up spending those. So those weren't part of the original ARP ESSER. Those were kind of the tag-ons after the fact.
President Pearson?
Yes, so the category for community services on the, no, that goes, no, you were there.
Yep.
For the, yes, that portion. Okay, so you used all of that. And
right.
So of that $240,000, we couldn't continue to invest in the community, we couldn't use it any more of that in the community services?
No, not at all. See, those last three that are there were separate individual grants. They weren't part of the original RPESR,
okay.
so we couldn't like move money around on some of these. Now, I will tell you that on some of the RPESR stuff, it did go to the the charter schools as well. The charter schools weren't able to spend all theirs either, but we were able to utilize funding that they didn't spend. And so even though some of the charters didn't spend it all, we were up in the RPESR able to use their money to fund our programs.
Okay.
So if they didn't spend it all, we spent theirs.
Okay.
And we were able to do that.
Thank you.
All right. I wanted to thank Mr. Phillips, the whole administration for getting this done, spending all the money that we could. Thank the board that was here when it was approved. This was a huge deal for our district, I think, and once in a lifetime type of thing, and to make sure that that was all allocated to things that are really going to help students, or that did help and will continue to help students in the future, I think is outstanding. So thank you.
One question. Board Member Carpenter sparked a question when he said continue to support students. So some of the things that we were able to do, we cannot continue to do. Do we have a plan? I know that we had like certain specific support, for an example, at Auburn that came through the RPESR. So are we, and I had asked prior to funding expiring if we could look at how we can continue to support. Have we come up with a plan for that?
Yeah, the buildings really have the ability through their local allocations to continue to support some of these programs if they really found value in them. And so Antoine Harris is one I think that you're specifically talking about. We have at least, I think, 3 or 4 of our buildings that have continued with Antoine Harris. We do have other partnerships with some of the other folks that are on here. Like we still do work with Boys and Girls Clubs. We still do work with Discovery Center. These were just things that were kind of up and above. Going back and looking at some of these other ones, I know there's still work being done with like Washington Park Community Center, YMCA, we still do work with them, still do work with Northwest Community Center. I know the Park District, we're still doing a lot of work with them. Let's see, what else?
We also, because of the RPESR, reporting requirements and data tracking, it gave some of our local organizations really strong data to seek other forms of funding as well to continue on their program if we don't have a funding stream that meets those needs.
Yeah. And so some of these other ones too, we're continuing, like I know Jefferson has continued with paper. We've got Rosecrans operating in a number of the buildings. We are doing Star 360, and we are doing Panorama as well. So those were things that, the building said were really key to being able to track and monitor, student progress continuing to come out of the pandemic. And so those were things that we've continued to fund. But I think, really we left it up to the buildings for the ones that they found value in to go ahead and continue. And they've got adequate dollars to be able to do that.
Okay, actually, I was referring to Rob and Rocky.
That one I don't think anybody has continued on, but I'm not sure.
So that is a side conversation that I'll continue to have with Superintendent Jarrett and perhaps the principal at Auburn.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Our last item tonight is to preview the consent agenda. Are there any comments or questions about the consent agenda items for the Performance Monitoring Committee? Do you have a question, President Pearson?
I do. Okay. So there was a, one moment. It was related to special education, and the SSG addendum. Hello.
Hello.
So in the background information regarding this, the district has a legal obligation to seek out and identify students who may be eligible for special education and related services through an evaluation process, then provided services for eligible students accordance with their need pursuant to federal law, IDEA, as well as under Section 504 and under state rules and regulation. The problem is staffing certain certified positions in special education in order to ensure the timely completion of required evaluations and other compliance-related documentation, as well as to ensure provision of required services from personnel in areas including psychologists, social work, and speech and language pathologists. So we're spending a significant amount of money to service our special needs, correct?
Yes.
Can you please help me understand, because there's currently a student that have been out of school now 2 months. And I originally forwarded this to Student Services. And to date, this student is still out of school and is not receiving services that the parent indicate the student should have at home. How are we managing servicing our students with special needs?
I wouldn't going to need the specific information in order to follow up on that specific student. But what this is with regards to this board item is we have to go look for outside companies to fill the gaps. For like speech, we're down 12, and psychologists, we're down 8. So like this particular board item is to fill those gaps. This was actually like a salary table. But if you're looking for a specific student, I would just need to know the specific student in the situation, and I can get back to you.
Okay, and then there's another segment, I think it's in planning. It sparked my attention. So in other words, we're going to use these services to fill these gaps.
Correct, we have to, because the minutes are on the IEPs, so we can't just say, we don't have the staff. I have to do everything possible in order to fill those gaps, in order to make sure those services for all the students have the IEPs.
Okay, and are we currently to date with evaluations for IEP?
So I'm unaware of any situation where we are not fulfilling all of the timelines for 60-day clock, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I'm asking, are there any outstanding evaluations, is what I'm asking, to your knowledge?
No, there's nothing we have not gone over on any 60-day timelines for the evaluations. I mean, we probably have a couple hundred evaluations open right now, but that's just, they get 60 days to complete their evaluations any given time.
Okay.
So we have not gone over this year.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yep.
If there aren't any other questions, that'll conclude the Performance Monitoring Committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Mrs. Vice President McCall will now lead the Planning and Development Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. The first is a resolution to sell general obligation school bonds, health and life safety. So earlier today, we had a public hearing on the proposal to sell not to exceed $9,900,000 school fire prevention and safety bonds for the purpose of conforming the existing facilities of the district that house students to the building code promulgated by the State Board of Education of the State of Illinois by altering and reconstructing the said facilities and having equipment purchased and installed therein. The resolution authorizing the sale of bonds is attached to the agenda. Are there any questions on the 2025 sale of school fire prevention and safety bonds for Dr. Brown? Madam President?
Oh, my light was left on.
Oh. No questions, so the resolution will be brought forward at the January 21st, 2025 board meeting for action. Our second item is the Golden Apple Foundation grant acceptance. This year, Golden Apple Foundation is providing over $59,000 in grants to local teachers in the areas of literacy, STEM, special education, the arts, and more. Kirsten Swanson is the teacher recipient of a Golden Apple Special Education Grant that will help provide $2,366 to purchase decodable readers, adaptive equipment, and tactile support materials for 31 students with disabilities and IEPs for the International Baccalaureate Program at Conklin. These funds will be presented to Kristen and her school at the grant reception, held at 4 p.m. on January 7th at Anderson Japanese Gardens. Are there any questions regarding the Golden Apple Foundation grant acceptance? Seeing none, this will be brought forward to the January 21st, 2025 board meeting for action. We will now move on to the preview of consent items. Below are the consent agenda items for the Planning and Development Committee. A, New Connections Academy, Mike Raya, Executive Director of Special Education. B, IFB 25-17, plumbing upgrades at 5 schools, 12/10/2024. C, IFB number 25-18, Marsh Library, HVAC upgrades and openings, date 12/10/24. D, reoccurring contracts, Bell's firm of architect, design for the roof replacement at Welsh Elementary School. This completes the report for the Planning and Development Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President McCall. I will forward some additional questions to student services, or specifically for IEP. I'm not going to go into details. It was in regards to the background for this, but I'll get that forwarded. We are now at the Governance Committee. The first item on the agenda is the Vision 2030 resolution. Vision 2030 is a set of suggested legislative priorities created by all the statewide associations. The representative from those associations met multiple times over a 12-month period to create and refine these priorities. Vision 2030 is the successor of Vision 2020, which led to the creation of evidence-based funding. Are there any comments or questions thus far? Dr. Jerd, can you give us a quick overview of Vision 2020?
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Board President Pearson. Just what we're dealing with here is essentially what's called a non-binding resolution, where we're and what all of the state associations are asking every board to do is similar to what we did with Vision 2020, which Board President Pearson referred to. The Vision 2020 project was passed in the 2014-15 school year, so a real long time ago. And there was something really awesome that came out of Vision 2020, and that is evidence-based funding. Before evidence-based funding, the state of Illinois did not have an equitable funding model. And while we still aren't all the way where we need to be in terms of ensuring that zip code is not predictable of funding in our state, we've made real significant progress. The state now adds $350 million a year to the state funding formula every year, and the districts like Rockford that are furthest from opportunity annually get the lion's share of those new dollars each year. So everyone gets what they received in the past, depending on whether they're in category 1, 2, 3, or 4. And RPS has been for every year but one in that category that receives the maximum amount of funding. So that has been a really positive thing that came out of the last one. So now we're pivoting in 24-25, and what should the priorities be. And the state of Illinois, these associations that came together, a lot of different folks in the room over multiple meetings, ultimately came up with 3 big priorities. One is future-focused learning, one is shared accountability, and one is predictable funding. And what's kind of interesting, and I just spent a little time and looked at the 10 board priorities, because I think our local board priorities are the most important thing. That's why we hire our own lobbyist, because while there are many things we can agree with that are good for all districts in the state of Illinois, we also have to prioritize our local needs as well. And what I thought was really powerful is if you look at the 10 things the board came up with that Stanford was able to read off, there are 6 of them that fit into future-focused learning, and there are 4 of them that fit into predictable funding. So we've talked about things like transportation funding and reimbursement, those 2, and special ed funding and ADA accessibility funding. Well, there's a whole call for stronger facilities funding, and ADA funding would absolutely be part of that. And special education funding is one of the biggest unstable funding sources in our state right now. Right now what happens in the state of Illinois is if we run short, and Dr. Brown at some point can update the board as we go through our budget cycle, but one of our biggest risks every year in the budget, even though evidence-based funding is pushing more overall dollars in the system, we have funding sources called mandated categoricals. And those mandated categoricals fund required things that are in a specific category, like transportation and special education. And when the belt needs to be tightened in the state of Illinois and we're short of money, they do what we still call proration, which is even though you're entitled to X, the state gives you X minus whatever they prorate that. So one of the things that this is calling for is that we have to stop doing that. Not only should we do evidence-based funding, but we should also fully fund commitments to things like mandated categoricals. The other big area where I saw alignment from what the board said and Vision 2030 are those six issues that pertain to future-focused learning. And 4 of our topics had to do with teacher shortages, so we talked about shortage of speech path. Tonight's board meeting is a great example of that. We're investing a very large contract to try to hire some outside folks. Well, that's not a unique problem. I know people get tired of me saying that, but part of the value is sometimes what we need in Rockford is what the state needs, and it is kind of a statewide issue, and we can align our local needs with what everyone else is complaining about across the state as well. So I think what Vision 2030 can do is we can just, in a non-binding resolution, this doesn't commit us to anything financially, but essentially what we do is we say, hey, we agree with these general priorities that the state needs to get better in these areas, that this is a challenge. And what I think a real simple way of saying it is we often, with our state lobbying work, have to say what we're against. We often are concerned about unfunded mandates and things that are costing us money without getting things. This gives us a chance to say some things that we're for. This is what we want more of. And I think our board did an amazing job of doing that locally, which I think is the most important thing for us to do. But I was really proud to see that independent of you all knowing what was in Vision 2030 at that point, you literally came up with 10 priorities that perfectly align with 2 of the 3 areas of the state. One thing we didn't focus as much on locally is this idea of shared accountability. But I think those are certainly things as you evaluate it, I suspect you won't have a lot of concerns with. Particularly, one is really doing a better job of unfunded mandates. The state does a lot of asking us to do more and more and more and not necessarily paying for it. So that was a big focus on the shared accountability piece. But that is a little bit of an overview to what is in Vision 2030. And I think it could be a way we can be part of guiding the state on what to focus on while we maintain autonomy to say, here, but these are our local priorities. And I think the more those are aligned, the better. And I want to make sure we keep both of those conversations going here. So thank you to Ms. Stanford for presenting our local priorities. And for the board, you put a lot of work in on a Saturday morning to help us build those. And I'm really proud of what our board came up with. I think those priorities are inspiring to me, and our lobbying team and I are very familiar with those. And so this is just another way we can make our voice be heard in Springfield and across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Jarrett, for that quick overview, because none of us was around back in 2015. Did everyone get the email from Superintendent Jarrett regarding Vision 2030? No? Yes? Okay, so everyone did get the email. So it is indicated, just to go over it really quick, there were like 4 main items. Promote future-driven skills that allow for more college and career exploration. Enhance student safety and well-being. Attract and retain high-quality and diverse educator pipeline. Promote curriculum and instructional flexibility to meet unique needs of local communities. And I think that this is very good. It is worth reviewing even more. I always like to, when things are presented, I personally like to know the flip side of it. So I found an article that indicated 4 things wrong, and this does not mean that we're not in support of Vision 2030. I just think that we ought to look at it in a broader perspective. 4 things wrong with how Illinois leaders want to change public schooling. So they had a Vision 2030 lacks needed literacy reform measures. A Vision 2030 lowers proficiency benchmark for students. And Vision 2030 suggested lower standards could harm students. Vision 2030 muddles the ability to understand how students are really performing. So everything that is presented are very good. I just asked board members to look at it from a broader perspective and to look at all avenues. I understand that while resolutions is not law, however, it is used to support, for an example, bills that want to be passed. So, you know, as I look at this broader, I do ask myself a question: what bill will Vision 2030 be attached to, and what does that bill represent? So some may say, all right, Board President Pearson, you're reading way far into this, but I think that is something worth considering, as where this, while it sounds good on the front end, how will it overall impact our students? So as we continue to review Vision 2030 to prepare to vote in support of the resolution, if the board members would take a closer look at it and come back with questions. Dr. Jarrett did present about a year ago at the divisional meeting in Kishwaukee, I believe it was, regarding Vision 30. So it's definitely some positives in it, but I am asking board members to look into it and bring those questions forward before we vote in support of Vision 2030. Any questions or comments regarding Vision 2030? Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is a letter from the state regarding mandated training for the Board of Education. The Rockford Public Schools have multiple intensive schools. The state of Illinois requires 3 board trainings to equip the board to support the administration in driving improvement in the schools. We have scheduled the first of these trainings, which is the board self-evaluation, which is Monday, on next Monday, January 13th, 2025. So the following trainings, I'll look at the calendar, and we'll come up with a date that fits all of us. But the board training, I will ask, the board evaluation, I will ask that you come prepared to address the positive and negatives of how the board is doing and what we can do to improve, if there's any identified barriers between the board and administration that impede on cohesiveness, a more cohesive relationship, and being able to give constructive criticism or feedback in regards to any other area of how we are as a whole, as well as individual board members. So that's just a snapshot of the board eval, but we had to do the board eval first before moving to the other categories of training. So you can expect to hear from me as I hear from the state or collaborate with the state and Superintendent Jarrett on the district training and the board for the upcoming trainings. Are there any comments or questions? Are there any questions or comments regarding governance consent items? We are now at the petition and communication portion of our meeting, when we invite the public to make comments. 2 individuals have signed up to speak, Mr. Luke Snyder and Mr. Kyle Wolf. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you will be contacted in a timely manner by staff. Each speaker will be allowed no more than 3 minutes to address the board. It is not appropriate to discuss matters that will otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. If you look to your left, you will see 2 digital clocks. One show the total time allotted to the public comments, and one show the total time for each speaker. We thank you for your cooperation with our guidelines. Mr. Snyder, you are first.
Thank you. My pleasure. Members of the school board, my name is Luke Snyder, and as a senior at Auburn High School, I feel uniquely equipped to tell you that your policies aren't working. The district is plagued by issues, and you spend so much of your time on your CTEC project instead of caring for our existing schools. I can tell you now the money would be infinitely better spent on our existing schools than on this new center, and not on some trendy security initiative like the Evolved systems that a simple Google search can show the ineffectiveness of. Rather, providing the resources needed by the teachers, the people who actually build our schools. Many of these teachers at previous meetings have pointed out significant problems in our school systems. And what was the board's response? To restrict free speech by limiting public comment. I understand the claims that it's out of a need for order, but it appears to be an action based in cowardice instead. The district is plagued on issues on every level, but it seems that the administration is too focused on the optics and making the numbers look good on paper rather than in practice. And that's without paying attention to the policy in cases like that of Paris Moore or 1,000 other complaints of racism and discrimination in our school district that have been met with lawyers and swept under the rug instead of met with solutions. You mentioned before the issue of people in the district passing the buck. I'd recommend that you, as the top of the school administration, learn from President Truman and say that the buck stops here. Take responsibility yourselves and spend time listening to all levels of school staff. I'd highly recommend that every board member spends time subbing in schools. See what it's actually like yourself instead of hearing reports from admin after admin. Just so you can understand a small part of the issues facing teachers. I would also recommend that the board carefully consider the possibility that after years of struggling, the district needs a leadership change at the top. Most of all, I would suggest that the board listen more to the needs and feedback of teachers who have consistently been the best part of my school experience, even through struggles with administration. Tragically, over the course of my time in RPS, I've seen the schools grow progressively more like prisons
Your time
than
is up.
teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening. I want to discuss a little bit about Vision 2030 and its relevance to the very real challenges we face in Rockford Public Schools today. I must ask, how will Vision 2030 address the urgent struggles of our teachers, students, and schools in school year 26? We cannot afford to wait 5 years. I believe there are actions we can take now to make Rockford an appealing place for teachers to want to work again. Let's start by acknowledging a hard truth. Many of your teachers are not in a good place right now, and you cannot begin to heal until you admit there is a problem. Yet our leaders either don't believe there is a problem or refuse to admit it publicly. Surely this board must have noticed by now that more and more teachers are coming forward to speak publicly about their struggles. What will it take to bring action or even an acknowledgement? One critical issue that we can address going into next school year is time. And we heard a lot of this tonight. The issue of time. We must ask ourselves if the current school day or week has the built-in time needed for educators to be effective at their jobs. In my opinion, it does not. As someone who has taken it upon themselves to work closely with union leadership and listen to the perspectives of hundreds of REA members across this district, the common problem that threads it all together is time. Educational professionals simply do not have the time to effectively do all the things you are asking them to do. And as the list of demands and needs grow, it often does so without adequate time or training for implementation. We heard about that a lot tonight with the math. This creates a culture of exhaustion, frustration, and burnt out. If we want to build a culture of respect in RPS, we need to take seriously the issue of what you are asking your educators to accomplish in a day, in a week, in a month. We must hone in on what is manageable and realistic. Perhaps Vision 2030 is a path towards healing these issues, but I urge you to stop focusing on grandiose visions of a distant tomorrow and consider what you can do in the present. Vision School Year 26 could have these actionable steps. Number one, reassuring the structure of the school day, reassessing the structure of the school day and week to provide educators with the time they need to meet expectations and maintain their well-being. I have more points here, but I will not have time to get to them all. But that is the big one. We need to reassess what we can actually do in the time we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the both of you. Are there any recommendations or suggestions for agenda items or new business, board comments or concerns? So this is not necessarily for a discussion, but I want to express that when we have speakers that have waited through our entire meeting and have been very patient, because at some time, and we can look at previous methods in which we did this, but it is my understanding that at the committee of the whole, they were allotted more time. So I will consider the 5 minutes versus 3 for the committee of the whole, and I'll discuss that with the administration. I'll take a motion and a second for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. You'll have a good night. Thank you for your time.